Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today we're going to talk about the Jump to Light Speed spoilers part 3. As usual, I'm rating those cards before I actually played them, so I haven't played with any of those cards, so take everything I say about them with a grain of salt. This is for the context of competitive, constructed, obviously. I'm only rating those cards in this specific context. I'm giving cards 4 different ratings, is either not excited, not sure, good, or amazing. So let's start off with the first card, which is going to be none less than Grand Admiral Thrawn, the leader. So when I look at this leader, I'm not super hyped by the stats. We're looking at a deploy 6 at 4-7. That is not a good stat. And usually leaders that have that kind of stat don't still play in Star Wars Limited competitive play unless they have an amazing ability. Thank God, this is kind of what we're looking at when we are talking about Grand Admiral Thrawn. The ability to re-trigger a second time any when defeated ability without any cost, any condition to be respected is amazing. The only limit is that you can only do it once per turn, which is more than enough in my opinion. So the ability is really strong. There's tons of great when defeated cards in the game. Obviously it has to be a when defeated that is scalable, that can be used twice. So for example, Super Laser Technician does not work with it, as you cannot just resource the Super Laser Technician twice, but there's just many other cards that triggers very well, some that are already very competitive, and some that might not be as competitive, but can become very competitive when their effect gets to trigger twice. So I'm not going to make the list of every single card in the game that does well with this. You're probably going to have to figure out by yourself, and there's going to be loads of them. I think Admiral Thrawn is going to be playable on multiple archetypes, on multiple colors. Depending on if you want to play it aggro or maybe more value focus. Obviously it's going to be based on units, so I don't think it's going to be really a purely control archetype, but it's really going to be something that I think is likely to be very competitive. At least it has a very good chance to be. So obviously this leader is held back by the fact that it's a deploy 6 that's 4-7, so that's obviously kind of inconvenient, but I think the ability is strong enough that I think it's going to see competitive play, so for me it's going to get a thumbs up. Next we got Director Krennic. So this card there's so many cool things going on with this card. So at first value it's mostly like a 2-2 shielded for 2, which is nothing special, we've seen that before, but turns out 2-2 for 2 shields are quite good. They see a wide amount of competitive play. Crafty Smuggler, L337s are a kind of card that see a tremendous amount of play. Maybe it's just a meta thing, maybe it's not always going to be the case, but for now we can safely say that 2-2 for 2 shielded is a very solid stat line for turn 1 play. But there's a lot more with Krennic that meets the eye, because this card has tons of synergy with a lot of different leaders in the game. And this is what really makes this card quite special. First of all, let's talk about the obvious fact that it obviously reduced by 1 the price of the first unit with a when defeated effect that's going to come into play. That's going to be quite good, because there's actually people play cards that have when defeated effect, even if they don't necessarily play a deck that has a lot of when defeated cards. They do play some of them. For example, be able to play Super Laser Technician for 2, it's not bad. Maybe you can buy it up with something that costs 1. Maybe like you're playing this on a Palpatine. Let's say you play Super Laser Technician on turn 2. Now you can play it for 2 resources, which gives you a resource to spare that can allow you to use the Palpatine's ability right away. That will allow you to sacrifice Super Laser Technician, draw a card right away. So it's not bad. Obviously, it's amazing in the context of a Thrawn deck, where you're going to be playing, most of your units in your deck are going to be playing when defeated effect, and then Director Krennic becomes completely amazing. Not only that, of course, you are likely to be able to get the benefit from that effect for a lot of time, for a very long time, because turns out getting rid of a 2-2 shielding unit is not that easy unless you have a very specialized weapon. So Krennic is really strong in that specific deck. Not only that, it also has a lot of strong, interesting synergies with other leaders. So for example, you're playing this in a Gal Saxon, it's a 3-2 shielded for 2. Very aggressive, very strong. You're playing this in, let's say, in a Gram of Tarkin. Gram of Tarkin can turn this into a 3-3 shielded, or even bigger if it stays in play. So this it's absolutely auto included in a Thrawn deck. I think it's amazing in Palpatine for the reason already said, but also because it's an official. That means you can follow up with a turn 2 Royal Guard, and Royal Guard, of course, likely to keep its Sentinel status for a while, because Director Krennic quite difficult to kill. So There's just so much going on with this card. It's amazing and it's obviously great against Thrawn. If it was only great against Thrawn, I would just give this like a thumbs up. But it's good in so many other decks, which I think it deserves the amazing status. I think it's really, really going to be a card that... It's not going to be an auto-include, obviously, but it's going to be so good in so many decks that I think it's worth... It's good enough that it's going to deserve like an amazing status. Really, really an amazing card, in my opinion. Next, we got Onyx Squadron Brute. This card is quite okay. It's a 2-3 for 2. Healing the base is a bit awkward. Generally speaking, whenever you're playing 2-3 for 2, you want to play it on turn 1. And on turn 1, your base is already kind of fully healed. And 2-3 for 2 is quite easy to kill for the opponent. Like, 2-3 for 2, even in space, is not really an amazing stat line. It's a bit better in space than it is on the ground. But the thing is, if your opponent, most of the case, will have the opportunity to just kill the Onyx Squadron Brute, and you're not going to be able to heal the base. So, I think it's okay in Thrawn because you can trigger the effect twice and heal your base twice, which make the card worthy, but once again, you need to have the opportunity to be able to heal 4 on your base, which is far from guaranteed. So, yeah, it's not unplayable, but I don't think it's amazing. We'll see if it's get played. For me, I'm going to give this a maybe. We got Landing Shuttle. A card is not amazing at face value. It's basically kind of a way worse version of Yoda. Yoda has the advantage of having Restore 2, which is massive, and it also is a force unit. The Landing Shuttle, it is Imperial Transport Vehicle. Those are nice traits, but doesn't have the Restore 2 is kind of a big deal, but it is in space, so that's something worth noticing. So, I don't think it's unplayable. I think it might be decent in a Thrawn deck. Outside of this, I don't think it's very good, so I'm going to give this a maybe just because it might be good in Thrawn. I'm gonna give this a benefit of the doubt. It's honestly, it's a very generous maybe. I could have rated this as just not excited. Moving on, we got Droid Missile Platform, and this card is really, really nice. It does a lot. There's a lot going on with it. It obviously is a separatist, so you can play it on turn 1. If you sacrifice the Vanguard infantry, you can play it on turn 1 as a 5/3 in a Doku deck, but it's just a 4-2 for 3 is actually a pretty solid stat line. And then the when defeated effect is not bad. If you're playing an aggro deck, or you're playing an indirect damage deck, I think the card is just very solid. Obviously, when you get that effect twice with Thrawn, then it becomes really, really insane. We're talking about 6 indirect damage. That starts to be a lot of damage you get on this card. So if you're playing kind of an aggressive version of the Thrawn when defeated archetype, I think this could be this is going to be an absolute auto include in that deck. I think it's a very solid card in general. It's quite punishing if you don't deal with it. If you deal with it, you do get some value out of it. So I think it's a very solid card. I'll give them a thumbs up. I give it a thumbs up. Sorry. Sorry, we already talked about that one. And here we got Shuttle ST-149. So this card is okay. It does get the 3/4 shielded for 4 is already kind of decent in space, so quite difficult to kill. But on top of this, you also get a when play effect and a when defeated effect that you may take control of token upgrades on a unit and attach it to a different eligible unit. This means that at the very minimum, you can actually play this card, move the shield from it, and move it to a different unit. So that's already kind of like the effect can always be used to give the shield to someone else. So think about this as a 3/4 for 4 that can comes to play. It gives a shield to someone, sort of. Which is nice. Obviously, it has other application to it. It can be used to move upgrade. Obviously, the best use is to move upgrade away from your opponent and attach it to your own unit. As this is why this card really gets a lot of value, especially when it triggers the effect when played and when defeated. To me, the card itself is playability is really going to come down to whether upgrades and tokens, upgrades and shield and experience are going to see a lot of play. And it's far from guarantee if we know it's going to be the case or not, so it's going to be a meta-dependent thing. So I'm going to give this a maybe. Then we got Colossus, which is the new 35 HP base. 35 HP base, guys, is a lot. It's a lot. I was not expecting they would push as quickly to the 35. Maybe I was expecting they were going to 32 and then maybe a little bit higher. But here 35 is a huge thing. It's I was not expecting they would go as high as quickly, and it's massive. It's massive. We know because we've obviously been seeing the difference here that it makes between playing a 25 HP base versus a 30 HP base. We've already seen the massive difference that it makes to have 5 extra HP on the base, and you really need to have a very, 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 very powerful ability to justify having 5 less HP on the base. And as a result of that, Tarkin Town and ECL has been the only two 25 HP base that have seen a wide amount of play. And that's because 5 HP on the base is such a big deal, you need to have a massive ability. We can push the reasoning on the other side by saying that for a base, to justify having plus extra 5 HP, to balance that fact, it needs to have a very, very, very dramatically worse effect. So in this case, you start the game with 1 less card. Is that really that big of a downside? My thinking is like it's not. I think that, I mean, once again, it's going to require testing to find out how big of a deal that is to start the game with 1 less HP, card in hand. But keep in mind that card advantage in Star Wars Unlimited is not that big of a thing because you're drawing 2 cards per turn. Therefore, drawing 2 cards per turn means that you are unlikely to run out of cards. So obviously, there are certain decks which won't be able to afford to start a game with 1 less card. Like, let's say you're playing an aggro deck, really having... The more aggro is your deck, the more you rely on your opening hand to be able to play the game. If you're playing a control deck, it's the opposite. Basically, your starting hand, the only thing you want in your starting hand is just having some sort of removal that will get you the first few turns. That's not that difficult, even if you get 1 less card. So, I think that the more control you play, the less of a deal that is to have 1 less card in your opening hand. If you're playing an aggro deck, obviously that's a big deal to have 1 less cards but I think most control deck will gladly take 1 less card in hand in order to get 5 extra HP. So, on top of my head, what are the leaders that benefit the most from this? For me, there's 3 leaders that jump to my mind. Obviously, any hard control deck would love to get an extra 5 HP on their base, even if that means having 1 less cards. Especially since there's many ways to do card advantage in this game. Obviously, any expensive leaders, I mean, the most obvious case is a Palpatine. I think Palpatine Blue is gonna love that card. Getting an extra 5 HP might make it so Palpatine Blue actually can win reliably against aggro, because suddenly you're making the game that much longer that allows you to reliably be able to deploy Palpatine every game, which is like just insane. So maybe the green base control deck will like this a little bit less because it really gives them less chance to be able to ramp on turn 1. But overall, I think a hard control deck will love that, having the 5 extra HP. I also think that this card, 5 extra HP is very good on any Anakin deck, like an Anakin Blue would love that, because it means that Anakin now has just a lot more room to grow bigger and bigger and bigger, which is very, very nice. So, in my opinion, this card might completely drastically change the way we play the game, and it might have if we're gonna have a whole cycles, it's gonna have such a massive impact on how we play Star Wars Limited. So I'm gonna give this an amazing, like, for me, it's at least on this particular card, the 1 less card in your hand does seem, at least at face value, as being well worth the 5 extra HP you're getting, and this could completely change the way we play the game. I mean, powerful playable base will have a dramatic impact on the way we play Star Wars Unlimited, and I think any strongly we see, for example, how impactful Tarkin Town is having of an impact on the meta. So this card is any competitively playable base has just it's a massive earthquake in the way we play in the way we play the game, and I think Colossus is going to be one of those bases. Next we got Camaria, the new Camaria, a second chance for Camaria to be competitively viable. This one is a lot better than the previous one we had. The when play ability is a little bit situational because you need to have already another unit with a when defeated ability, and that when defeated ability needs to be able to target friendly units. So that's a lot of conditions. So most of your obvious example is going to be Admiral Marty, that allows you to kind of ready another unit and stuff. But this card might have some strong potential, combo potential in the future. but it is quite expensive. The ability remains fairly situational. And the when defeated effect is okay, but not like insane. So I think this card is fine in a Thrawn deck because basically leaving like 4 TIE Fighters behind is quite good, and you in this kind of deck you're more likely to have to be able to use the when play ability. The start line is okay without being amazing. So I think I'm gonna give this a maybe. I don't think it's trash, but I'm not like super like sold on it. I don't think it's like 100%. However, one of the best art in the game. Amazing art, just saying. Next we got Rose Tico, which is on new Heroism Vigilance Leader. Not a big fan of her. I think Heroism Vigilance is quite competitive. There's like a lot of strong leaders in that color combination between like Yoda, Rey, and even like any other leaders that can simply just play a base. Just play a red base. So competition is quite hard in this particular case. The ability is very situational. It's basically a more situated version of the ability of Obi-Wan, because not only do you have your healing, you have to heal a vehicle specifically, and that vehicle needs to have attacked this turn. So, and by itself, the just healing enemy healing unit is fairly situational. So obviously there's a world where there's going to be enough support for this card to work, and we've already seen 2 cards that support quite well with Rose Tico. But I believe the ability is quite a bit worse than the ability of Obi-Wan, which was already considered to be like not so great. The leader deploy is nice. You get a 4/6/4/5, which is a good start line, but the ability doesn't get a lot stronger. So unfortunately, I think Rose Tico is not quite there. We'll see how it goes. Maybe we're gonna see more support for this card, but for now, I'm rating this as bad. It's not as trash as people make it to be, in my opinion, because healing 2 on something is significant. But I think that this card is just a bit too situational, in my opinion, to be a competitive leader. Talking about, obviously, support for Rose, we have the Red Squadron X-Wing, which is just a great, straight up, just great card. 3/4/4/3 is a decent style line for a space unit. It's a rebel, which is huge, and it does have the option to come into play with 2 damage on it, but then you get to draw a card. So the flexibility of being a 3/2 that draws you a card or a 3/4 is very, very nice. Obviously, in this deck, vehicles are very good. You want to play pilots on them, so you want to play those vehicles to have pilots on them. This might see play in Wedge if you're playing a blue version of Wedge. I think this is probably going to see play in like, I don't think it's necessarily an auto include, but it's definitely going to see play in a lot of blue-white decks, depending on how the meta shapes up. So I'm going to give it a thumbs up. I'm not going to give it an amazing because I don't think it's like to the point where it's going to be an auto include in all blue-white decks. I don't think that's going to be the case at all. 3/4/4/3 is okay, but it's not like amazing or anything. So we'll see how it goes, but it's definitely a good card. Moving on, we got Paige Tico. So she's quite nice. First of all, 3/2/4/2 in blue-white is a very good start line, because blue-white does not really have very few units that can actually do that. Right now, if you're playing blue-white, like blue-white with double blue-white, for example, the only other unit you get access to that has a 3 attack on turn 1, which is like kind of a very important breakpoint to be able to deal with Battlefield Marine, is going to be phase 1 Clone Trooper. And this card obviously has no downside. This is a 3/2/4/2. While this one is a 3/4/2 that can be played as a pilot. And a pilot is not bad. Get yourself +2/+2. Any ability is on attack, give an experience and deal 1 damage. That's pretty strong. I mean, it basically gives a +1/+0 permanent every time you attack. And you get that that tokens obviously before you get to deal damage. So you get to benefit from it right away. So obviously going to be pretty good in Wedge if you're playing Wedge Blue. We'll see if Wedge Blues end up being better than Wedge Yellow, which is kind of the way people are leaning towards right now. But yeah, just the fact that it's a 3/2/4/2 that has a piloting ability, I think by itself makes it a very playable card. So I'm going to give it a thumbs up. I don't think it's as good as Red Squadron X-Wing. I think Red Squadron X-Wing is significantly better than Paige Tico, but I think she's going to see a significant amount of play. Next, we got Dagobah Squadron Pilots, which is another cheap pilot. I think cheap pilots are very, very good in Wedge. because Wedge gets to play them for 0, which is massive. So I think it's going to see play in Wedge if you're playing Wedge Yellow. And it is basically strictly better than we saw the +1/+1 that gives Raid 1. This one is strictly better because it gives you +2/+1 instead of +1/+1. And it is also Rebel. So it is strictly better. Obviously, it is only for heroism. But yeah, I think it's a pretty good pilot. It's going to see play. If you're playing Wedge Yellow, you're probably going to play that card. But we'll see if Wedge Yellow end up being a competitive archetype, and if it's going to be the best version to play Wedge. That remains to be seen. That's why I'm still giving it a maybe. Then we got another Boba Fett. Oh my god, so many Boba Fett in this game. It's crazy. Anyway, this one is a 5/4/5 shielded. That's not 5/4/4 shield is not amazing. Dies to a lot of things. It's not terrible, but it's basically playing a 5-drop that has no immediate impact on the game. Is not great. However, the piloting is quite good. +2/+3 for 2 is nice. And then you get to deal 1 damage to any unit as soon as you get to play it. So I mean, even your opponent gets to answer whenever you pilot it, you're still going to get some sort of value out of it. If it's a transport, which there's plenty of in the game, you deal 2 damage instead, which is nice. And not only that, obviously the obvious combo with Jango Fett here is quite big. As you play the upgrades, deal damage to something, tap that things down. So I think it's going to be playable in Jango. How playable it's going to be, I don't know. The space in this deck is going to get very, very tight very soon. So we'll see if it's end up seeing a lot of play. But I think it is definitely in the realm of playable in Jango. And that's why I'm giving it a maybe. Then we got Hound's Tooth. This card is quite nice. 4/3 for 3 in space is a stat line we've never had before. And I think it's not bad. It can... it doesn't pair well into a lot of 3/2s, which is currently like pretty heavy in the meta. But so it's gonna depend on if the 4/3 stat line is gonna end up being good in the meta or not. So that remains to be seen. But I think the card is quite solid, and the ability is quite good. Whenever the attacking unit is exhausted and they didn't interplay this phase, you get to basically deal damage first. I think that ability can be very annoying to play around for the opponent. It's a little bit similar to the Boba Desecrator's ability in that way, but it's a card that's not always going to be relevant, but when it does, it's going to be quite good, and you're also getting some really decent stats. So I think it's a solid card. I don't think it's going to see play everywhere, whenever, but if you need a 3-drop in space, this is like another good option, and it is Underworld, which means that it goes well with Cad Bane, and it does well with, obviously, now there's 2 of them, so there's a lot going on with this card. I think it's quite positive. I think at the very least in Cad Bane is going to see play. And then we'll see where else is going to see play. Then we got the IG-88, the new IG-88. So basically, in order to have the +3 attack bonus from this, you need to have at least 1 unit being damaged, which is not that difficult to do. But with that being said, it's still something that mostly relies on whether your opponent is going to let you do that or not. So it's a little bit unreliable. But if you do, you get yourself a 7/5 for 5, which is a very good stat line, even though we're talking about a fighter that has no immediate impact on the game. And 5 health is quite vulnerable. So there's that. But obviously you always have the option of putting this as a pilot, in which case give +3/+3. So on this one, I'm going to give this a maybe. I don't think it's trash. And with all the indirect damage going on, having damage unit is definitely going to be pretty easy in certain decks. So it's definitely something that's going to be worth testing. But it seems a little bit conditional and vulnerable for me to really being confident that it's going to see play. Then we got the IG-2000. This card is quite solid. A 3/4 overwhelm is not great, but the 1 playability is very solid. 1 damage to each of 3 units. That's obviously very good with Jango. If you get to have a Jango deploy, you can actually tap down up to 3 units. Jango specifically was kind of lacking in the 4 resource curve department. So that's going to be like a pretty solid card that you can play. It's also a nice card to get out of a triple dark raid, or even from a sneak attack. Anything with 1 playability is very strong with triple dark raid. So I think this card is quite solid, and it's gonna for sure people are gonna be trying it in Django. We'll see if it ends up making it the deck, but it seems very solid to me. Then we got the Dengar. The 5/4 for 4 stat line is pretty bad. So let's see what it offers on the... so obviously you're going to be playing this card for the piloting allows you to deal 2 indirect damage, 3 indirect damage if it's underworld. So on this one, I'm not so sure. The +1/+2 for 2 is not great. The indirect damage only works, of course, on attack, and really start to become interesting whenever it's actually an underworld that you are equipping. So there's a lot of strings attached on this card. I don't think it's unplayable because 3 direct damage is definitely significant. But for me, I'm gonna give this a maybe. I'm not entirely convinced that this is gonna see play, but it's definitely could. Once again, a little bit difficult to rate indirect damage as it's still like a new mechanic we've never played with before. My understanding is that it is quite of a weak mechanic at its core, but once again, there's just so many cards that deal such a critical mass of indirect damage that makes me very hopeful that this is gonna see quite a bit of play. Then we got the first Order Stormtrooper. On this one, I'm a little bit more skeptical. I just think this is worse than Death Star Stormtrooper. I can't see a scenario where getting an indirect damage on attack would be better than having a +1 attack bonus. It also has the effect on 1 defeated, which means that you get to have this with Thrawn, but I don't think it makes up for how weak the ability is as opposed to something like a Death Star Stormtrooper. So to me, I'm not a big fan of this card. Next we got Leia Organa. I think the card is solid, 3/4 for 1 restore, and then the one play is pretty strong if you're playing a lot of deck with the piloting. I think without the 3 curves, especially in white green, is very competitive between Echo Base Defender and Southern Peacekeeper and all that stuff. There's just a lot of very strong 3 drops, and the new Yularen is also quite good. So I don't think this card is quite able to make the cut on its own. However, I think the card is quite good if you're playing a lot of pilots. So to me, in a wedge deck, I think this card is great. Other than the wedge deck, I don't think it's going to be quite as good. So I'm going to give this a maybe because the playability of this new Leia really is going to come down to how powerful is going to be pilot as an archetype. And for this, it's still not entirely sure whether or not it's going to be competitive or not. Next, we got the card called Rampart, which is a new ship. It's a 3/3/2 in space, which is super amazing. But here, the condition to actually be able to use that 3/3 is quite annoying. This unit does not ready during the regroup phase unless its power is 4 or more. So, right now, we haven't really seen any card that synergizes particularly well with it. Obviously, the pilots will allow to untap it. But the thing is, whenever you're playing a 2 drops, you want to be able to play it on turn 2, because what's going to happen here is that you're going to play this unit. It's not going to ready unless you're able to put an upgrade on it for 0. It's not going to be able to ready before the next turn, and then you're going to be playing a pilot, and then you're going to be able to start to ready it. That is so incredibly slow. Usually whenever you're going to play a pilot or an upgrade on this, in order for this to be able to ready, you want to be able to use that upgrade right away. That's kind of the point of playing upgrades over playing units, is that upgrades have an immediate impact on the game if they're played on ready units. So you can't really do this with Rampart because it's not going to be ready by the time you pay the upgrades, and only afterward it's going to get ready. I don't think all this trouble I don't think is worthy of the +1 attack that you're getting. So I think this card is pretty bad. I would have been a lot more excited if this card was in heroism, because obviously it would be a lot easier to use this card in a deck like in a wedge deck that can obviously play R2D2 for 0, or can play something like or can play obviously all those pilots for 0 thanks to the wedge cost reduction. We don't have something like this in Villainy, so obviously my rating on this card can change dramatically if we see some particular combos with it, but for now I'm definitely not excited about this card. Moving on, we got Kyogran Turn. This card is a little bit tricky. It's one of those ready effects, but this one is conditional. You can definitely build your deck around such a card because there's quite a lot of fighters in the game, and also a lot of transport, and most of them will have 6 attack or less, which means that the condition is not that steep. And then being able to ready a unit for 3 is quite powerful. For example, you can actually use that card to ready something like a fire spray. With this card make the cut, it still remains fairly situational. With this card make the cut, will there be combo potential on this card? It remains to be seen. And for now, it's not sure whether this card is going to see play. I'm going to give this a try. I don't think it's unplayable, but I don't think it's guarantee that's going to be good. Then we got the latest leader that's been shown to us. It is Rio Durant. So, as far as like the leader deployments comes out of 3-5-4-5 Saboteur. That's pretty bad. Obviously, it's very understats. So whenever you're going to be deploying that leader, you're really looking for the deployment. Luckily enough, I think Rio Durant is probably one of the best pilot leader in the entire game. You get yourself +3, +5, a stat line. That's a lot of stat. That's more than... It is the best stats for cost that we've ever had compared to... If you compare this to Han Solo, gives the +3, +4 at deploy 5. You got the Boba Fett that gives +4, +4, but that deploys on 6. And it also gives the vehicle Saboteur as well, which is great because whenever you build a giant unit like this, the last thing you want to do is to have that unit being blocked. And if you deploy this on transport, you get yourself an extra +1 attack. That's huge. The only thing I don't like about Rio Durant is obviously the fact that whenever he deploys, he gets really... it doesn't have an immediate impact on the game. That means the opponent has an answer to it. You basically lost your entire value. With that being said, it is a deploy on 5, which is kind of makes it a little bit more acceptable. And the other factor as well is that the leader's ability is very good. So one thing that we haven't seen, most of the pilot leaders we've seen so far, they either have a very bad leader ability or they have a pretty bad leader deployment. Rio Durant kind of has both. He has a really strong leader deployment. Granted, the opponent doesn't have an immediate answer to him. And he has a very strong leader ability. And this is what makes me think that he's been the best pilot we've seen so far. The best pilot leaders we've seen so far. So the ability is you pay 1, you attack with a space unit, and you get +1 attack and Saboteur for this attack. I think that's actually quite easy to use and quite powerful. Obviously, it kind of comes down to whether Saboteur is a good keyword to have in the meta or not. But if you're playing an aggro in space, the last thing you want to see is your opponent having those like space sentinels, which can be very annoying with his Bright Hope. So I'm quite hopeful this card. I'm gonna give this a thumbs up. I think it's quite good, and obviously, Cunning Villainy has always been a strong color combination, very competitive. So I'm quite hopeful this card can see a lot of play. Next, we got Captain Tarkin. Pretty weak stat lines, a 2-5-4-3, but it is it gives a pretty interesting effect of the vehicle, +1 attack and overwhelm. I think I don't really see the deck that could go with this. Maybe there's a deck we don't know yet about that's gonna combine very well with it. So I don't think it's unplayable. Like the passive effect is very strong in the appropriate deck, but right now just the deck that would want such an effect doesn't quite exist. It's very hard to play wide with vehicles. Vehicles are quite expensive by nature. There's obviously ways to put down vehicle tokens like the little TIE fighters and stuff, but is there really enough support for the archetype in this set for Tarkin to be playable? This remains to be seen. So I'm gonna give this a maybe. Obviously, a card that combines really well with the new Tarkin is going to be the Kijimi Patrollers, which gives you 2 TIE Fighters. So basically a 1-1 for 2 and then a 1-1 tokens for the... So, yeah, it's basically droid deployment, but instead of getting 2 1-1s on the ground, you're getting 2 1-1s in space. Okay. So it is basically a strictly better... I mean, 1-1 in space are definitely better than 1-1s on the ground. So it is definitely better than droid deployments. But obviously droid deployments being a mono black card deserves to be a slightly less powerful. This card is a purely synergy based deck. I think on its own, 2 1-1s in space is not particularly good. So it's going to depend whether there's going to be strong synergies around this. The fact that this unit is non-imperial is definitely a downside. Because right now there's not really much synergies around the first order cards. So for now, I'm going to give this a maybe. I don't think it's unplayable. I would have been a lot more excited if this was Separatist, because if it was Separatist, then you would be able to take it out from the new Invisible Hand. And obviously getting multiple units in this kind of Separatist deck is always great to use with Dooku, to use the exploit. But in this case, it's not, so I'm just going to give this a maybe. I'm going to give this a benefit of the doubt and see how it goes. Then we got Direct Hit. So, a lot of people have been very excited about this card, and I honestly don't understand why. This defeats a non-leader vehicle unit. So, here's the problem with this card. There's already a lot of strong blue removal, so obviously the competition in that realm is relatively fierce. And basically, the problem I have is that we're looking at a unit that has... how is this going to compete compared to the other removal we're talking about? So, right now, the premium, like full cost removal that would compete with this would be something like Feather Dragon. Feather Dragon, killing any unit that has 5 attack. Generally speaking, whenever you want to play those kind of like unconditional removal that kind of kill something regardless of the size, you want to use them on very large units. And here's the thing. Most of the large units will have 5 attack or more. I know there are exceptions, like, for example, Ruthless Raiders and stuff, but there are far more units that has 5 and more HP that you would want to kill with that kind of removal than there is vehicles. Whenever you think about playing direct hit over Feather Dragon, think about all the amount of units that you are actually targeting that you can actually kill with Feather Dragon compared to direct hit, and you will really quickly realize that you're killing way more important stuff with Feather Dragon than you had with direct hit. And that's not even close. That's not even close. And once again, you can make the argument, yes, but direct hit can kill a lot of small stuff, but do you really want to spend full resources killing small stuff? The answer is no. So, in the realm of course, of the large things that you want to kill with this, you are hitting way more units by playing Feather Dragon than playing direct hit. So, honestly, I think the meta would have to be in a very, very, very weird place for people to be wanting to use direct hit over Feather Dragon. Maybe people can play it on top of Feather Dragon, but I honestly don't see this happening. I think people would rather play Vanquish. I think this card is just simply a little bit too specialized. I would have been very excited for this card if it cost 3. I think at 4, it's just too specialized, and I don't think it's a very good card. Then, I've already talked about this card quite a bit in this video, and that's obviously the new R2. I love this new R2. 1441 is a very good stat line. The current R2 that we have does that. I mean, it has obviously the scry effect, which is kind of nice, but this one is, instead of having the scry effect, it can be played as a pilot upgrade for 0, which I think is very, very strong. So I think in an aggro deck, I would much rather have this R2 like in Sabine instead of the old R2, because having this upgrade that costs 0 +1/+1 is huge. People are already playing Metal Ceremony, which is kind of a +1/+1 upgrade for 0, but Metal Ceremony can only be played on units that have already attacked, while this one can be played on something that did not attack. Obviously, it can only be played on vehicle, which is definitely a limitations, but I think the flexibility of being played as a 1/4, as an upgrade +1/+1 for 0 is very, very nice. So I think this card is pretty decent in aggro. I would prefer to play this card over Sabine. I think the +1/+1 piloting is more relevant than the scry effect of the original R2. Obviously, the other deck that would want this card, obviously, is any piloting decks, notably the Wedge deck, which I think really likes this card. So, for all those reasons, I give this card a thumbs up. Then we got Time Bomber, which is, if you really want to go for the indirect damage archetypes, this could be the 2-drop that you're looking for. 3 indirect damage is quite a bit. Obviously, not as good to get the 1 compared to the 1/3 that we have from the Rebels, but it feels like the indirect damage archetype is going to be something of villainy, which justifies the fact that this card is slightly less aggressively costed, even though it is 4 health for a 2-drop, which is nice. So yeah, very hard to know if this card is going to be good or not. It's really going to come down to indirect damage. Indirect damage, I still haven't played any games with indirect damage, so for me, it's quite difficult to rate this. I think it's going to come down to whether the indirect archetypes is a thing or not. If it does, then he's probably going to be wanting to play that card, and in this case, that's why I'm giving this a maybe. Then we got a card called Commandeer. This card allows you to take control of a non-leader vehicle that costs 6 or less without a pilot. Then you ready the unit, and then you get to attack with it. So it's basically is a change of hearts that costs 1 less resources, readies the unit, but is very specialized. It only works on the vehicle without pilot that costs 6 or less. Okay, so this card is amazing because change of heart, as we know, is already a very, very good card, but this one not only it's a very, very strong card because it also readies the unit, which makes it so much easier to use than change of heart. And also bounce the unit, so whenever you give back the unit, you're not giving it back, you're actually bouncing that unit, which is just a huge blowout. In my opinion, this one might be one of the best sideboard card in the game. It is very specialized, but oh god, in the deck in which it's good against, it's amazing. So in my opinion, give this a thumbs up. It's really is one of the most powerful sideboard card. The fact that it's a trick is also very nice. It means you can get it out of Django's, but it can be part of kind of the Jambox toolbox. That is really, really strong. So it comes with a lot of conditions here. Cost 6 or less. Not a pilot, has to be a vehicle. That's why it cannot be. I don't think it's something that's going to see play in the main deck unless it's really we're on a very weird meta. But I think in the right meta, this card is really, really amazing, and it's going to be a sideboard card at the very least. I would be very surprised to not see this card in sideboard. Then we got Electromagnetic Pulse, which is also kind of a sideboard card. Deal 2 damage to a droid or vehicles and then exhaust it. So it's kind of reminds me of like a perilous position, but it only costs 1 instead of costing 3. But obviously only works on droid and vehicles. So I'm going to give this a maybe. It's going to depend on the meta. I don't think it's as good as a sideboard card as Commandeer is, but I think it's quite good. Once again, if we're in a meta where there's a lot of vehicles, I love the fact that once again FFG is giving us a very powerful vehicles, but also a lot of powerful answers, meaning that if vehicle decks ever become a problem, it seems that FFG is giving us the answers to have a way to counter them. Next we got Boshek. So Boshek is a very nice. Sorry, just sorting out the lights. Yeah, Boshek is the new pilot that I think is quite good, because one of the problem with pilots is that they are very card intensive. You're going to require, of course, to play your vehicles, and then you play your pilots for cheap using Wedge. But that's kind of shenanigans. It's very card intensive. So having a way to draw cards is going to be quite important in that kind of deck. And Boshek does that. It is a pilot that draws you card, which is very, very nice. I think naturally you're going to have a lot of card with an odd cost in those kind of decks, because you're going to have a lot of one cost upgrades, one cost pilots, which are all odd costed. And that means that this card very relatively reliably can draw you 2 cards. But if it only draws 1 card, it's already kind of worth it, in my opinion. So yeah, +1/+2 is not great, but the pilot didn't get discounted. 3/4/3 is not terrible if you get a chance to play this as a unit. And once again, being able to draw cards is going to be very strong in that kind of deck. So I'm going to give this a maybe. Of course, it's going to come down to whether the pilot attacker is going to see play. But if it does, I think this card is going to be part of it if he plays yellow. Next, last but not least, we got Mandalorian, which is our new double yellow card. 5/6 for 6 with immediate impact on the game. That is very promising already. 5/6 for 5 is quite a good stat line. Exhausting up to 2 ground units is quite of a powerful effect. With that being said, it is very specialized, only works on ground. We know that the new meta is going to be very focused on space, so that's obviously going to be a problem. Once again, if the card is not good as a unit, you can use it as an upgrade, and as an upgrade, you get +3/+1, get to tap something as it gets played. So I think this card is quite decent. I don't think it's going to be better than Cantina Bouncer, and I can see a meta where this card could be played in Double Cunning. Is this going to see play right away? I don't know. I feel people play Cantina Bouncer as a main deck, and then this as a sideboard card, possibly. But the flexibility of the piloting is quite nice. I'm giving this a thumbs up. I should probably maybe give this a maybe. Maybe I'm overrating a bit. But one of the big deal with this card is obviously the stat line. You get a 5/6 is kind of a big stat line. So for this, I'm giving it a thumbs up. Okay, this is actually the last card. Shuttle Tydirium. Anyway. I think it's a bit underwhelming. 2/4/3 is not a great stat line in my opinion, unless we are in a meta filled with 3/2s, which is currently kind of the case, but it's only focused on like Django, so it's a little bit. The on-attack ability is not super reliable, and unfortunately requires you to get another unit in play for it to work. So no immediate impact, kind of underwhelming stat lines. For 3-drop, usually you expect a 3-drops in space to be 3/4, and on top of this, an ability that is conditional because it requires you to get an outcast on top of your deck, and also another unit to give experience. If this card was a 3/4, or if it has the ability to give experience to itself when it attacked, if one of those two things were true, I would love this card. I would actually give this card a thumbs up, but as it stands, I think it's just a little bit underwhelming, so I don't think it's going to see play, and it's not like, once again, there's going to be a lot more competition in this set as far as good cards, so I have to rate those cards harshly. Thank you so much for following that video, and that was basically all the cards for... I caught up with all the cards that has been revealed in second week. Gotta say that I'm super excited for this new set. I don't think I've ever been so excited for a new set since the game released. This new Thrawn leader is absolutely amazing. There's just so many interesting things to do with this. There's just so many interesting and cool things that I'm looking forward to do with this new set that I cannot wait to try out. And for sure you're going to see loads of video from me featuring those new cards. And I hope that the meta is going to get a big check-up and a big renewal. I'm so excited about it, and I hope you guys also are. Anyway, thank you so much for following that video, and I'll see you next time.